Let's talk about the new album, the Outward Bound album. Is there anything new in the album for you? What's your perspective now that it's done, it's out, and you're going on tour?
Well, I think that there's probably different things. That one, for me, was the change in making the instrumentation more sparse and more centered around the guitar, where some of my earlier works involved larger groups. And on the first record I'd done locally, it was called Blues Attack, and I had half of Clifton Chenier's band and half of what would become the band on the second record. It was a lot more blues-oriented. The second record was with Bayou Rhythm, and it was a lot closer to like the Cajun Zydeco and blues roots. So this album is a departure in that, in some of those terms. You know, it's I've considered it more of a rock album. But it's got all of the ingredients from my roots, and which are very important to me and most inspirational. And also, the fact that I really wanted to go after the sound of the guitar and its many different aspects.
Well, there's a lot of vocals on the album, and you have a reputation for, of course, the guitar. And I'm wondering how, do those two fit easily together for you when you're composing? Is there...
Yeah, they really do. I've been singing for a very long time. I do find that they both trade off on each other. I'll get an idea for a song lyrically, I'll get an idea for a song instrumentally and vocally, and so there's a sort of an interesting interchange there.
Are they separate processes for you? I mean, working on lyric and melody as opposed to guitar, for instance.
I would say, generally speaking, the guitar comes easier. I wish the vocals did, but I'd have to admit that. But what I find is that, I'll get ideas playing a guitar that work into songs. On the other hand, I'll be driving down the road and I'll get an idea, I'll hear melodies in my head and I'll get ideas for lyrics. And it's just really a sort of a constant sort of a tug between all of those different perspectives. And when I really get down to it, the other interesting surprise for me, I'd probably say the surprise for me in terms of making the record, was that I found that until I really got down to the business of finishing the songs for the record, knowing that I was going to record the album, that's when I go into like the next step of creative overdrive, so to speak, and which enables me to really finish some of the songs I've been working on for some time.
The impetus of recording helps, like, polish them up?
Well, what it does, that and the fact that in terms of making an album thematically, conceptually, how all of these different ingredients tie in together, and sort of a common thread that runs through the songs to have a unifying theme. And I think that the fact that once you know you're going to go in the studio, you got these people going to show up, you've got to, you make all the arrangements and all the logistics and all that falls into place, then you're really on top of it, whereas up until then it's more of the process itself of writing for no particular set thing, but when you start really gearing it towards an idea of an album, then that's when it really starts to the finishing and shaping the songs. And I found that was a pretty exciting part of it for me in the creative process.
There's a thing in the bio here, a quote that says that the album's about the essence of direction. Could you talk a little about that?
Well, basically, the idea is that if you listen to the album, I knew one thing for sure. I wanted to start with Soldier of Fortune, and I wanted to end the album with Outward Bound. And this was probably a throwback from my 60s days of when albums were made more as a concept, perhaps. But I don't expect anyone to necessarily sit down and listen to them from top to bottom. But if one were to do that, and the CD format lends itself towards that. This person starts out in the first song, and in Soldier of Fortune, and it essentially goes through all these different experiences or travels, and as he develops, you get to the last song of Outward Bound, then it's sort of like a bookend, and the idea that travels and experiences and relationships as a metaphor in terms of spiritual development. and sort of this person's on a quest for spirituality. By the time you get to Outward Bound, this person is centered with himself, and then that's like the outgoing theme of the album. So it's on the one hand, you could take each of these songs on their own, hopefully. I mean, one would like to think, and that's fine. I mean, I enjoy pieces of work where they're collections of songs, but I think that this record represents a lot more than that for me because I've had so much time. In terms of, these are really important songs to me, and I really wanted to get the most out of them and for them to do them as best we could. I think that's part of it too.
So what does the centering for the, well, I guess character, what is it, all the different elements they run into, or?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's, everybody's sort of on their own path and for their own learning. And I truly believe we create our own reality through our belief systems. And one thing that in Soldier of Fortune, they're sort of like hints. I mean, you could listen to the songs on one level in which the person's traveling. But again, it's a metaphor. This person's also searching. And the irony that the thing that's most missing is something within himself. And I think that's something that as time goes by and you learn, you grow and you have experiences, and particularly in relationships, having this self-awareness itself is the centering. And I think
I see.
Outward Bound, that's what would probably be most significant in terms of summing up what the record's about.
Is there any basis for this kind of philosophical thing? Are you exploring any specific philosophical line?
I have to, I've read a lot of books over the years and studied this. I think that's something everybody has to do for themselves, draw their own conclusions. One thing I didn't want to do is really just spell everything out, and my idea is really to hopefully fire other people's imaginations to draw conclusions of their own for themselves, because it's a very individualistic thing, in my humble opinion, and writers too, people I grew up listening to in music, and particularly I was more, I would say, influenced by songwriters that use a lot of narrative and would sort of adhere to the narrative form.
Who would that be?
Like Bob Dylan was big in respect, and
Springsteen at all?
Sure, yeah, and I got into Bruce like his early records, and I really liked that aspect of it, and Robbie Robertson, and a lot of Paul Simon's work, and that's his early work. These people represented songwriters who were really, there's more to than just if you break through the surface, there's a lot underneath there, and I think that's what makes a song timeless as well. I mean, I listen to a lot of their songs now, and to me they're as fresh, and they have that element about them that was really vital 20 years ago, and I think it always will be. And that's what I'm more interested in too, is to hopefully write songs that stand the test of time.
There are a lot of your different musical influences worked into the album. That also kind of connects to the theme of exploring. Was that a conscious effort?
No, it was. I mean, it's a lot of it. Of course, you're working on inspiration and intuition, and I couldn't help but notice that too, and a few others had pointed that out too. I think that's part of the process itself. It reflects that. Really, another one of the exciting things about making your own record is finally, I got to bring all of my gear in the studio, and I mean everything. I brought all of my guitars, all of my amps. We had amps coming and going. We had really, a lot of old vintage gear, and always trying out something. So we really worked on sounds a lot. At the same time, we really wanted to create this feeling of space on the album, and a lot of that has to do with how you use the instruments, and how, for example, like on Sacred Ground, where it's really just the vocal and the dobro and everything. It's like you can feel the space in between the lines reinforces the lyrics, and that's the kind of thing I'm really interested in too.
Now you have a pretty strong connection in Colorado, right? Spent some time up in Denver, Boulder area.
Oh, sure, for many years, and especially I was living in Estes Park in 1974 and 75, and I first went up to Colorado in, I think it was the summer of '71, and I went up there with a band called Brer Rabbit. And we'd been together for 2 years in Louisiana, and we finally got our mission at one point was to get to Colorado and start playing gigs on our own up there. And once we got up there, the band lasted almost 2 months. So there was a lesson in there somewhere right off earlier on. But I fell in love with the mountains, and I fell in love with the area, and I made some really close friends that I'm still, have stay in touch with and see whenever I get a chance when I'm up there. And so I've sort of been coming and going ever since. Particularly, we had the band Bayou Rhythm. We worked from probably 83 to 80, probably 82. When did we first go there? Anyway, 82 or 83 to 86, 87. So we played up there quite a bit.
Did you find that being up here kind of freed you up musically?
Yeah, I always felt, when I first came up there, I think the fact that there were a lot of players from, other parts of the country I'd never known, ever had met, and that was really kind of my first opportunity to experience that. And I have to say that I've always felt that it's been, for me, a place to plug into creatively, and I always got sort of recharge my batteries in a certain way. Louisiana represents something very special for me with the culture here and the heritage that has had such a dynamic impact on me, and the sounds and the music, the people. But there's something about Colorado's like the other end of the spectrum in a way for me, and it's like I need both. And so I guess that's why I've continued this coming and going between the two. I mean, I've traveled to a lot of places, but there's something really special about coming up there for me.
I've been following the Subdudes since they moved to my town, and there seems to be a real strong connection that way. They came up here and found kind of what I'm hearing out of you in terms of getting their music together.
Yeah, that's a good. John Magny's a good friend of mine, and I had. He used to play with Little Queenie and the Percolators. And at one time, I did a short stint with John Magny when our drummer, Kenneth Blevins, was also in that group. Yeah, I say of the Goners. Well, Kenneth used to be a member of Little Queenie and the Percolators. I did a short stint with him. And I remember we were opening for BB King outside of New Orleans, and John Magny was telling me that he had originally, about Denver, and we started talking about that a lot. So once they started thinking about moving up there many years later, we exchanged phone numbers, and in a way they sort of did what we kept, trying to decide about doing with Bayou Rhythm. In the end, we didn't. We played up there a lot, we made the circuit a lot, but we never did move up there, just completely relocate. Johnny and Tommy and them did. And so I was really, really glad to see that for them, and I think that was really important, for them, and I think you're right. It's probably correct in your assumption there.
Yeah, it's also interesting. We sent a band down there, the Iguanas, that ended up doing pretty well.
That's a good point. Willie and them. Jumpin' Johnny Sanzone is a good friend of mine, and so we've always kind of kept in touch, and so I kind of know what's going on with them. And Willie was working with the Iguanas. Yeah, I know. I met both of them. I met Johnny. We were playing at Linden's at a bar in Fort Collins, and Johnny was tending bar at the time, and that's how he and I met. He and our harp player Milton got to be great friends, and met Willie, and they used to come and sit in with us in various parts of Colorado.
You probably wouldn't recognize Linden's at this point.
No, I've heard it's really changed.
Yeah, they've really changed it. Who are the people that you've worked with that have had the most effect on your development as a musician? Yeah,
that's a pretty big question because it's so much reality, it's almost too big to fit. But I think that, there have been a lot of people that have influenced me, but probably my heroes like Clifton Chenier was really one of the top. I'd have to rank way up there because of he was so electrifying, and there was so much in his music and what he did that I learned so much from. But there's been a lot of people. I mean, John Haitt was a big influence in terms of he's such a prolific writer, and he's just one of the greatest, and being able to be close to him as he was in the process of songwriting was really interesting and fascinating for me. And he gave us the opportunity to just open up and cut loose, and like be, instead of when we were supporting the Bring the Family album, he wasn't trying to get us to necessarily just cop the licks on the record at all. He wanted us to do what we were doing, and that was really important, to give us that kind of leeway, and it gave me a lot of opportunity to grow instrumentally as well. But growing up, I listened to all sorts of music, and I think probably the fact that I was playing trumpet in school and was more or less covering the bases academically there, and having the influence from classical music and jazz background, and then when I started playing guitar, I would play, be like my rock and roll gig and playing with other bands and really getting into blues, and so that somehow that some kind of strange duality there you might not normally think of, that I didn't even really think about, but I think that's what opened my eyes and taught me to be receptive to anyone can teach you anything.
What's up?
Well, just anyone has a certain way they do something. And even if the person's not as technically developed, don't underestimate that they have a certain way of doing something that they can show that to you. And I found you can learn something from anyone.
No, there's something personal about expression.
Yeah, definitely, and of course, like with the great blues players, that heart and emotion and from their soul, that's the thing that really strikes me, and that shines in various ways and various levels in people, and that's what I really look for. BB King, the first time I ever heard Clifton Chenier in that year, I guess I was probably maybe 16 or 17 years old, and I also heard BB King in a little nightclub in New Iberia, Louisiana, with a small group, and I would say that was two very, big, influences on me to hear both of them that year. But a lot of, you have to look at in terms of songwriting, in terms of playing the guitar or musically, and really producing too. All of those things are people that have influenced me.
What about the magic of Louisiana? Is there any way of putting your finger on what makes it so special? And my perspective is, if there is a cradle of musical civilization in North America, I think Louisiana is it.
Well, I certainly couldn't disagree with you on that. I feel very fortunate, growing up here because of that. I think that there's just a very soulful aspect about the culture that manifests in various ways, in the music, in the food, in the people, and their perspective and their spirit of life. And I think that transcends all of that, and you just can't help but soak it up. If you stay here long enough and you're open to it, it's almost like an osmosis, or you really do. It really does affect you. And I have to admit also that that's one of the first things I noticed when I left here as a as a much younger man. I was probably 20 years old, and I was going out on the road, and in my mind, I couldn't, at that point in time, I was taking a lot for granted, the things that were right here as such value and resource to me. And aside from the music part of it, I felt like I needed to get away from Louisiana to grow, which I did, actually. But in so doing, I also came to realize soon that how special that particular kind of